Hi, everybody. This is Coach Aaron Saft in the Running is Life podcast. And today I actually have my coach, Ryne Anderson, on to discuss my long-term plan, what makes a good athlete, how do we communicate with our coaches, how can we be more effective coaches. So we got a lot in this discussion, and I really appreciate Ryne coming on and sharing all this with us. And I get into why I chose Ryne as my coach. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Ryne. And when we finish up the conversation, I'll hop back on and discuss everything that's going on in the world of running is life. So thank you guys. Enjoy this conversation, and I'll talk to you again at the end. All right. I have with me my coach, Ryne Anderson. Ryne and I have been having quite the discussion prior to this, but Ryne, I want you to kind of just give everybody the nickel and dime tour of of your coaching career, life, running, all that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I'm Ryne Anderson. I live in Knoxville, Tennessee. I've been a professional ultra running coach since 2021, and I work with CTS, which is pretty great. It's nice to like have colleagues you can reach out to at the snap of the finger and bounce ideas off of. And then like having our weekly continuing education meetings are really nice. And then, yeah, this is my full-time job. I'm super grateful and lucky to say that. And a big part of my philosophy is like here in the East and the South, I like to get out to my athletes' races and support them in person. I just find like it takes the relationship to such a different level. Like we're communicating regularly, leaving good feedback both ways, but there's just something about being there on race day that this person's put a lot of time and energy and sacrifice into. That's just like that's always so special to me. And that's a big part of coaching that gets me fired up. And I would say like helping people solve the puzzle to fit in their running, their adventures, in which they're super passionate about, but still balancing it with their other passions and interests, namely their family, their work, like their other hobbies they have. But yeah, I'd say that's like big picture view, a bit about me and like what gets me fired up as a coach. And then I've been running ultras myself since 2014. Um, I'm trending towards like in the 100-mile distance now myself more so. I just like I like having the long build and like embracing that process for 8 to 12 to 16 weeks, and then like big notch on my personal ultra running belt is I got to do Hard Rock this past summer, which was pretty cool. It was cracked up what it was meant to be. Peak life experience I'll never forget. And I had a lot of friends come out and share that experience, made it infinitely better.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I got to see Ryan at the finish.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Um, definitely an amazing event. Would you consider it one of your favorite events, or would you give that honor to something else?
I think so. And just like it gets a lot of hype, and I didn't know if it was just like too much Kool-Aid, if you know what I mean.
Yep.
But it really is like that community aspect. All those little towns are there to support the runners. It's of course amazingly beautiful. The pictures and videos don't do it justice. And just thinking of like, man, this is one of the oldest 100-mile races. Everybody wants to do this race. 150, 160 people get to toe the start line every year. It just fills you with so much like gratitude that really powers you in an incredibly difficult race. But I would say, yeah, the court like the whole experience ranks it up there with being a favorite event, most definitely.
Right on. And you yourself have a coach too, is that correct?
I do, yeah. Darcy Murphy, who is a CTS coach, a dear friend. And like as you know, it's we're on training peaks, we're putting our time and energy into other athletes, and then when it comes time to look at our training, I can speak for me, like it's kind of exhausting to then get to mine and put the energy into it, and then we have our own bias that goes into it, and just like getting to look at my training peaks in training from a pure athlete perspective is a lot of fun for me rather than me trying to be coach and athlete. And I have a great relationship with Darcy. She's the exact personality I need, knows how to be empathetic and then like also push and prod me when I need it.
And did you have that relationship prior to connecting with her as a coach, or how did you two connect?
So, obviously, we became familiar with each other, working with each other at CTS, and we would bounce ideas off of each other. I went out and did the bear a couple years ago and stayed with her, and we had a good friendship. And then I wanted to dive into the cycling world as an athlete for like 6 to 8 months, just out of curiosity. And she's been with CTS for 20 years, I think, and a majority of that until the last 5 years was as a cycling coach. And so personality match was great, but then also her rich cycling background and then also the ultra running was like, oh, this would be a perfect fit. And it proved to be and yeah, it transitioned back into me becoming like a runner as an athlete full time, so to speak, this past year. And it was a good transition between the cycling back to running. Thanks to her because she knew how to account for both, and like understand like transitioning from one to the other.
And you said you began with CTS in 2021, correct?
Correct. Hmm.
Were you coaching prior to that?
I was, yeah. So I was coaching independently starting in 2018. But during the 9 years before I became a full-time ultra running coach with CTS, I was a middle school teacher. I coached cross country for the middle and high school. I taught history, physical education, strength and conditioning for the high school. It was a small private school, so you're kind of like a jack of all trades in those scenarios. But like working with teenagers and all those different personalities gives me so much experience. And then working with adult athletes, and again, like you can like learn a personality type through the communication and realize do they need more of the cheerleader or do they need the drill sergeant? And I think we all need a little bit of both at sometimes, but it's like learning what that ratio is and then knowing when to apply more than one or the other. And like 9 years as a teacher to middle school and high schoolers was a crash course in that, to say the least, and served me very well.
Yeah, right on. And then what drew you to CTS?
Yeah, so I decided to stop teaching, give the ultra running coach as a full-time job a go. And I knew like doing that solo independently was a big mountain to climb. And it would have taken a lot of energy from like the marketing component, which I don't frankly enjoy. I don't want to put a lot of time and energy into that. I'm not efficient when it comes to doing that, of like writing articles that demonstrate like my philosophy and expertise, making social media posts to like highlight basic principles. Uh, and then there's a job opening at CTS, and I was like, oh, this is perfect. Like I can be a part of a team and take away that load of doing the marketing hustle and put more of my time and energy into coaching. And yeah, that was my goal with that, and it's lived up to that and been fulfilled.
That's awesome, man. It's great that you get the continuing educations, prior to us starting the recording.
Hmm.
I was talking about
Hmm.
having to do a research,
Hmm.
and I feel and we'll kind of talk about both sides of the coin here, not only being a
Hmm.
coach, but being an athlete, but on the coach's side, because there are quite a few coaches that will listen to this podcast.
Hmm.
I think sometimes we get drawn to certain certifications because we want to have something behind our name. And, like I've gone through a number of certifications and like the value of it, it can be great or it can be just hogwash.
Hmm. Hmm.
And, as you have, mentors, you can kind of get some feedback as to that. And I've had a number of coaches come to me and say, where do you find the most value in
Hmm.
certifications? And I mean, you yourself have UESCA, ultra running and cycling. Uh,
Hmm.
do you find the value in those? Like, would you recommend those to other coaches? I don't want you to have to, down talk anybody, but
Yeah, yeah. Hmm.
what value do you find in those certifications? Do you think you get more value out of the certification, or a combination of certification, mentorship, and the actual practical experience?
Hmm. Yeah, definitely the latter, all three. Like I view the certifications as like good nuts and bolts, a refresher on like XFIZ principles, and then that's got framework for application of, what's the difference between like road running training methodology versus ultra running. And then within ultra and trail running, how do you understand the different demands because we got road ultras, we got mountain ultras, all those things. So like those two certifications I did find a lot of value in, and like the resources you get from that certification, you have access to. So it serves as a great like 100, 200 level textbook, so to speak, that I can always reference. And then of course the mentorship is huge of just like being able to like reach out and ask a question of like, okay, I'm kind of stumped on how to address the problem with this athlete. And we can get very much like in our patterns and routines. And we just need somebody from an outside perspective to be like, oh, hey, have you thought about it this way? And then the light bulbs go off. And then, of course, the application with any skill job, like you've got to get the repetitions and just like over and over. And again, like to the previous point of like not getting stuck in your ways with like there's basic principles and methodologies that everybody is going to get, but you have to like zoom out and remember like, oh yeah, this is the why of this athlete, and this is how I need to change training specific to them. This is, of course, like what's their time budget to work with, their life demands, how their goals differ, and all that. So, to answer your question, yeah, the combination of all three. Is yeah what makes it a well-rounded approach and like the learning and application of everything.
And there's two things that I want to kind of break apart here. So, you are a coach who is
Hmm.
also being coached, and
Hmm.
same thing in my scenario. Um,
Hmm.
how do you differentiate your roles? How do you step away from being a coach and just
Hmm.
let yourself be an athlete? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, so I trust Darcy quite a bit, and we've communicated that like, okay, one aspect of this relationship is it's going to be like professional development for both of us, and like, of course, she's going to explain the why to me as an athlete, and then I I absorb that knowledge, and then I give her the feedback as purely an athlete, and then some other times I'd like, oh yeah, this is one thing that's come up in working with my athletes and how I've approached it, or like this is a way to do it. Or whenever she gives me feedback, she gives me that feedback as an athlete, and then she'll like have an addendum of like, okay, this is like the coaching nuts and bolts of that. So I think that's a really cool part of working with another coach is it's like professional development for both of you because you both realize you have a certain level of expertise, knowledge, and application, and you can communicate back and forth like coach to coach, coach to athlete, and of course Darcy is an athlete herself, and like athlete to athlete, and that's really fun to bounce the ideas off of each other and learn that way. And then like I always view the coaching athlete relationship as a collaboration, and we very much approach that the same way with Darcy and I, and just like she'll map out the long range plan, her thinking behind it, and I always come at that as an athlete first because like yeah, that's the foundation of our coach athlete relationship. She's the coach, I'm the athlete, so I always want to approach it that way first because I'm trusting her with my training. I'm not trying to hijack it. I've given her that trust. I've given her the reins, so to speak, because I want that. I feel like I do a good job of like delineating whenever I'm coming at it with like, hey, coach to coach. and it's like fun conversation, nuts and bolts. And then most of the time, it's always like athlete to coach. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's I mean, from my perspective, like I try to just, explain to you how the run went, right? Like I understand where you're coming from. I understand where you're programming, and then I take the workout, as you said, I'm trusting my coach, and I
hmm
do the workout, and I provide the honest feedback
hmm
of how I felt, right? Like how the
hmm
workout went. And then, I always tell my athletes, if you have a question about why we're doing something, that it's okay to ask, right? Like,
hmm
feel
hmm
free to ask me what we're doing here. What's the purpose of this? And sometimes that's not like a training piece comment. Sometimes that's more of like a phone conversation, right? So that you
hmm
can kind of take a more deep dive. Do you find yourself having those same conversations?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Um, Absolutely. And like communicate, yeah, giving that feedback as an athlete. And then if something triggers something in my brain of like, oh, this is a similar situation I had, like as a coach, like, can we like have like a breakout room, so to speak, at a separate time, like to discuss that coach to coach? Or like, yeah, definitely like, okay, we transition from this race to now to this next race. Yeah, let's get on the horn. Let's have like some big emails back and forth of like knowing the why and the direction.
Sure. And even a few things within that. What do you look for in an athlete's feedback? What are some of the things that
hmm
you would like
hmm
to see and hear from
hmm
the athlete?
hmm I think it's like starting with the basics, like how'd you feel before? How'd you feel during? And how'd you feel after? Because always going to look at the data, give a good analysis of that. It tells part of the story. The whole story um, comes to fruition with that feedback. Um, if you've had a stressful day at work going into that workout, that's going to dictate your heart rate. If we're using heart rate with that run, right? It's probably going to be elevated. If you slept amazing, you were well fueled, boom, we know like, hey, these are probably like peak numbers we can reference or whatever. So like, yeah, knowing that before, busy professionals, parents, students, like that level of stress and focus before that workout absolutely matters. And like, hey, how did it go? Sometimes it's like one or two sentences like, hey, I felt great today. No news is good news. Other times it's like, man, that calf thing I've been dealing with, it was there, but it loosened up in 5, 10 minutes. So we're good. They like no monitoring those like overuse and reoccurring niggles are very important to keep track of. And then like I definitely want to know like their mental perception of the workout. Like I felt good. That did not feel good because I can come back to them with the data, which 9 times out of 10, this is how it plays out of just like, hey, you didn't feel good today. You said you felt slow, you felt sludgy, clunky, whatever. But like, the data, like you're still moving pretty well. And this principle, like I always like to come back to with my athletes and reinforce is like you're always moving better than you think. Um, and like in those comments, athletes are their own worst critic. And it's a spot where they're vulnerable. And like, I want to know that story because it's not only like making sure the X's and O's of the training are dialed in, but like the holistic approach. I'm like, hey, are you enjoying the training? That's very important. Are we still having fun? Let's go back to that why. If we're not having fun with this training and like try to figure something out there. But yeah, that's kind of like overview of what I'm looking for in those feedback and comments.
Yeah. And so, full disclosure, I came to Ryan and asked him if he would coach me because in the past I've had great coaches, but I haven't had anybody that really looks at my metrics and says, based on this, it was too hard, it was just right. That's what we're looking for. Maybe we should pull back here. Like that's what I've been looking for, and Ryan provides that, in his coaching. There's like lots of coaches out there, but I knew Ryan had experience. I just saw him at Hard Rock, and I want to run Hard Rock again next year. And he's coached some of my friends that have done a lot of mountain ultras, and they've really had good feedback about Ryan. So, with their feedback and the fact that he's had the experiences that I want, and he's providing the feedback I wanted, that's why I approached Ryan. Um, Yeah, and I I have to say I personally as a I had a stigma for CTS of my own, but that was nothing that I was going to let limit the fact that Ryan is a good coach and I wanted Ryan as my coach. My stigma just comes because of my previous experience where like they recruited me to coach, and I said I don't I don't want to move over to CTS. I want to kind of stay
Mhm.
independent. And it was fine. There was no animosity left or anything like that. But I didn't want to join the group. And so that was my own stigma, just because of how that was. But it wasn't, again, it wasn't a negative experience, and I shouldn't even use stigma because that kind of portrays a negative connotation. That's not what I mean. It's just I didn't want to be a part of a larger group. And but again, because of Ryan and the way he coaches, I trust Ryan, and I wanted to move forward with my own training because I needed that accountability, which Ryan was talking about earlier, where like we have our own biases as coaches as to what we should be doing. And sometimes that's not the best for ourselves because we can't take a step back and look at, okay, and that's exactly what I said to Ryan when I started. Like, I started looking at my weekly mileage and I'm like, I'm going off the rails already. So I need that structure and somebody else's outside view to say, hey, Aaron, you're being an idiot. So, Ryan is providing
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
When you peel into somebody's data, and you're looking at the data and then you're getting the feedback from them of the larger picture, it sure does provide kind of the full story. And I kind of want to just talk about some of the things, because a lot of athletes look at some of the metrics from their own watches, right, that pop up on a daily that perhaps they shouldn't be. So if you could take a step back and say, okay, here are some of the things that we really should be looking on the daily. What were some things that you would say? You talked about stress, but like looking at metrics, is there certain things that you want to look at or things that you're like, hey, we probably shouldn't be paying as much attention to this?
Yeah, Garmin's notorious for all of its little this
Yeah,
is your VO2 max, this
right,
is
right.
your heat acclimation altitude, and my joke with that with the athletes is like ignore that unless it makes you feel good about yourself. Then like on those days, like then you take that knowledge. But
Right.
no, like I'd say the first big metric is like what is the athlete's training history? What has been their consistent level of volume in which they've been recovering well, staying healthy, consistent, and also performing well. That's the first anchor we have to define and go from there. Um, there is no golden rule of if you're doing X duration, it must be this many miles or hours. Like no, like it's always specific to the individual because they have a training history in which we've got to work from, and they've got a time budget in which we have to work within. And sometimes we've got to push the envelope and get the most out of that time budget, or like really plan out and like, okay, you're doing this 100 miler. It's going to take you 30 hours, like that 8 hour week budget. We're going to have to carve out some bigger weeks in there, to give yourself the best chance of success. But yeah, I'd say first thing, we gotta have training history and identify what has been like sustainable volume. And by doing like the way I do that is if their data is already in training peaks, that's fantastic. Because we can look at how many hours per week they've been doing, what's their elevation we've been doing. And I'm just like, it's like pretty simple. I'm looking for a consistent cluster without a large standard, like a large deviation, right? Like if I see the month of August and it's like 8 hours, 10 hours, nine. Okay, sweet. I'm going to dive into that month, and then I'm going to start looking at their feedback if they've left feedback of like feeling good, feeling good, feeling good. All right, sweet. We step two in identifying was this like as sustainable level of volume. And then third step, let's look at the data. Okay, when I've identified what's like a long run or endurance run, are those paces staying consistent? Are they erratic? Have they did any intensity or not? And like the answer to those questions is then going to tell me, all right, from that 8, 10, 9, 9 4 week chunk, that's a 9 hour average. We can either titrate up because all those metrics are lined up, or actually we need to go down just a little bit because there's been inconsistency with the pace or the feedback, or we're going to add intensity for the first time and we're going to have to bring that overall volume down. So like that's the first big metric, and like meeting the athlete where they're at. We want to look at the training history, determine what has been sustainable and unsustainable. And within that data dive, we're also going to determine what's their strengths and weaknesses. And a key part of the first conversation, the onboarding, is like the athlete also communicating their strengths and weaknesses. So we align those up with what like the data is telling us. And then from there, we're going to meet the athlete where they're at and what we have determined, like their sustainable volume, because the athlete who's training consistently is going to have the most consistent improvement. We don't want athletes to get injured. Kind of defeats one of the big purposes of working with a coach. And then like we've got these different designations of like a recovery run and an endurance run. And we kind of have an idea of like where those paces, if we're using heart rate with the athlete, where we want that heart rate to be. And we're looking to establish consistency there. We know there's a delineation point between pace and heart rate with those two. So boom, like start with the basics there. And then as we get into the different type of intensities, again, we're using the data to determine like what we think their zones are of like, hey, when you do a tempo workout, you should be somewhere between like 8:45, 8 minute normalized grade pace. And we're going to look for consistency there. So I'd say like the thing I keep hearing myself repeat is a consistency. And then it's defining what is the range we're looking for within those different runs. And like not every, so I gave that example of like, hey, tempo between 7:45 to 8 minute is what we're looking for. You know, when you're at the beginning of a block, the weather is 20 degrees cooler than normal, you're probably going to punch above 7:45, and that's understandable. You're at the end of the block, you forgot to eat a couple hours before the workout, it's super humid day, you had to run during the heat of the day. You're probably going to be on the low end of that range, and that's fine. That's where like that whole holistic feedback approach of like how they felt and all those other circumstances come into play.
Right on. It's a great overview, which kind of leads us into the long-term plan for the athlete,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
We've kind of onboarded this athlete, and now we're looking at the long term, which I've thrown you quite the fastball here and said, try to hit this.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
said, let's go after the Brutes Challenge and
Hmm.
possibly include in there hard luck.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so you came up with a great long range plan. You had
Hmm.
a great spreadsheet, which we're looking at together here on Zoom. Um,
Hmm.
is this accessible?
If you tab over to the Brutes 2025, then that's
Yes.
gonna like see how we've kind of at
Yes.
least outlined the dates as of now.
And what I was asking is this like something that you can share with like the public? Like, if somebody's interested in using this template, are you guys okay?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
All
yeah.
right.
We can attach
Okay.
that in the notes for
Okay.
sure.
All right. So yeah, in the show notes, I'll put perhaps if you send me a link to a blank doc
Hmm.
that people can
Hmm.
use, we'll
Hmm.
put that in the show notes just so you can see what we're looking at and
Hmm. Hmm.
actually use it yourself. But I like how this is laid out because just as he was saying, we're looking at basically the year as a whole, right? And we've kind of plotted in the various ones that I want to do, including Art Loeb out and back because I was 2 miles short of finishing that and want to get that under my belt. So we've got. And you had some really good feedback because I went to Ryan. I said, okay, so here's what I'm thinking for my order of the brutes. And you were like, well, we may not want to do, and I think it was Massanutten, right? Like we in
Hmm.
August, potentially because of water shortage at that
Hmm.
time.
Hmm.
So, we discussed about switching that up, which I think is a great idea. I don't think I ever confirmed that, but
Hmm.
we can certainly move Massanutten. So the order in which we had it, and Ryan, if you want to kind of take the lead here and kind of talk about the overall arching plan.
Hmm.
I kind of gave you some, I was like, hey, like this kind of segments it nicely. What do you think?
Hmm. Yeah. So the Brutes Challenge is doing 5 big routes in the southeast, in the east of the Georgia Loop, which is in North Georgia, Foothills Trail, South Carolina, North Carolina border, Pitchell, you run from Mount Pisgah to Mount Mitchell, Art Lobe Yo-Yo, you do an out and back on the Art Lobe. The Massanutten Ring, which I feel like is probably the least known of these, 70-mile loop in the Massanutten Range in Virginia, and then SCAR, the AT through the Smokies. And the nice thing about these is like they have pretty similar demands. The duration for these, they're 12 plus hour efforts, heavy focus on endurance. Okay. Then like I've got outlined in here, like what's the feet of climbing per mile, because that's always a big factor. And for the most part, you see it all clustered around the same of like 200 to 220 feet per mile. You have an outlier with the Art Lobe and the Georgia Loop, but on the whole, like those are going to all transition into each other. It's not like in April you're wanting to do a 50K on the roads. Like that does not mesh with this because this is like that's a different style of training.
Yep.
All this training is in the mountains on similar terrain, some big climbs, big descents, some sections where it's more rolling and undulating. It's technical. Each one of these has a big component of a self-supported nature, which is a critical part of this training because like it's going to take planning and logistics to know not only like trail conditions for different times of the year, but the water sources, as we discussed. And then like carrying a heavier pack because like depending on the time of year and the water sources, heck, you may need to carry like 4 liters of water. You're going like 200-mile style almost, and that's a lot of weight. And the runner has to know. You got to know like, okay, what pack am I going to use for that? And then my body has to be used to that weight. A key part of like picking the dates when we did for this was like knowing the trail conditions because these are big loops, they're big point to points in the summer, as you know, being a master trail builder that you are, some of these trails are less traveled and thus get overgrown more. Like Georgia Loop, for example, it's humid, it's hot, like it can get overgrown like that in the summer. So picking that in like peak winter when you're going to have a high likelihood of good trail conditions is essential. Pitchell, for the most part, it's good most of the year, right? Scar is a big one, just because you're up high on the ridge above like 4,000 feet basically the entire time. The weather component is essential. Like you've got to pretty much go like May, June, September, October. We've got it slotted in there. Your own experience, right? When you try to do Scar, you were post holing in snow because you picked March, April, and like that was the time you had to work with
Right.
your life. I remember at the time, it's like, hey, this is what I got to work with. I'm going to give it a go. But it's just, hey, that weather was crazy.
Right.
So
Yep. Yeah.
demands of these events, all pretty similar. High rate of climbing. You're going to need to use poles. You're going to need a level of self-sufficiency with a heavy pack weight, and you're going to have to do the logistics ahead of time and planning. There's no course markings out there. There's no aid stations. We talked about these dates and how it aligns with family obligations, kids cross country season, things like that. And then they're all spaced out in which you're going to recover and then you're going to be able to put in the requisite training for the next one. So like, for example, Georgia Loop to Foothills, you go from like 289 feet of climbing per mile for Georgia Loop to 202 feet of climbing per mile. Foothills is a bit more runnable. So after you recover from Georgia Loop, you're going to need to get on some gravel that's more rolling and undulating and have your body ready for that, right? So that's an example of how like the specificity from one event is going to transition into the other. And then the anchor of all this there in the green is like it's going to be Hard Rock or Crazy Mountain. Hard Rock, 320 feet per mile. We all know that's an extreme outlier. In terms of the amount of elevation gain and descent in Crazy Mountain, it's at like 220 feet per mile. All these events, the Brooch Challenge you're training for, lends itself well because these are big endurance events with a lot of climbing and descending, using the poles, a bit heavier pack at times, knowing how your nutrition needs and demands are just different for those longer, slower efforts. So it all blends itself nicely. And then whenever you propose this, like I'm aware of your athlete history. This was not an outlandish idea. It's difficult for sure, but is this outside of your wheelhouse? Is this mismatched with the type of training you've put in before and the events you've trained before? No, not at all. If this was a second year runner who's did like a 50K and a 50 mile and said this is the idea, I would discourage that. And then if they're like, no, I still want to do it, it's like, okay, here's the realities. So,
Right.
yeah.
Right. And then the curveball could be that, like, okay, if I don't get into hard rock, I'll probably need to
Mhm.
run something where I can get another qualifier, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
I mean, the ultimate goal, and I think I've shared this with the listeners, is that I run hard rock in the opposite direction that I've already done it. Next year would be the same direction as I did it, but as we know, you got to keep putting your name in.
Mhm.
So,
Yep.
so if I do it this year or this coming year, it will be the same direction, but I'm hoping to finally get in at some point and do it the opposite direction. Uh,
Mhm.
I'm much relieved that they stopped saying that you have to do it both ways to become a true hard rocker. But like
Mhm.
when I finished, they did say that, and it really
Mhm.
stirred something in me as like,
Mhm.
oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and as you said, it really is worth going to and being a part of.
Mhm.
It is an amazing course. It's probably my favorite of
Mhm.
all the ones that I've done. Crazy Mountain looks amazing. Unfortunately,
Mhm.
it doesn't have the Hard Rock qualifier in it.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
the other thing that could be a curveball is the accessibility to the trails here. Now, Georgia Loop should be just fine, but
Mhm.
we had it scheduled for January. It should be just fine.
Mhm.
Foothills should be okay. Pitchell is a kind of a question mark at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
we don't know what the Mountains to Sea Trail is going to be accessible. There's certain spots that have already opened, but there are
Mhm.
certain spots that remain closed. We have that slated for April,
Mhm.
so it could be okay. We just have to kind of wait and see. Same thing with Art Lobe. Again, portions are opening, but we just have to make sure that it's accessible. So, and we talked about moving Massanutten because we had it slated for August, which, August, it could be
Mhm.
extremely dry on the course, which makes it even more challenging. Do you remember where we suggested moving that to?
I think we said like around May because one thing with each of these, well, not each, but most of it, like Georgia Loop and Massanutten, for example, there's races that utilize these trails.
Right.
Like whenever somebody comes at me and says like a friend or an athlete, hey, I want to do Georgia Loop, I always tell them like, hey, target between like February to April because Georgia Death Race is happening and
Mhm.
use a lot of those trails. Those trails are going to be clear at that time.
Yeah.
Like that's a easy hack, so to speak.
Right.
Massanutten, it takes place middle to end of May. If you time it around there, you're gonna have good trail conditions, and like the trails being clear, no major blowdowns, no sort of overgrowth. So like that is how I approach those two and their trail conditions and accessibility.
Yeah. And then Scar,
Mhm.
it's going to be accessible from the Fontana Dam side, but
Mhm.
the construction on 40 right now,
Mhm.
we can get it by going around the Tennessee side, but
Mhm.
and they're talking about potentially opening up, one lane to let traffic in and out.
Mhm. Mhm.
But again, kind of have to keep an eye on the 40
Mhm.
corridor to be able to get home.
Mhm.
Otherwise, we'll have to go
Mhm.
back all the way around.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a big
Um,
drive.
yeah. So there's unique challenges to each, and as you mentioned, it's looking at each independently and deciding, okay, how are we going to attack this? What is crew accessibility? Because things like Scar, there's one point where you can get access
Mhm.
to your crew. Whereas
Technically, there's multiple, but you gotta have friends who really love you.
like nothing. Yeah, yeah,
That want to hike up five,
yeah,
6 miles and bring you
exactly.
all your
Yeah.
stuff.
My
But
my
yeah.
family really loves me, but I love them more. So I'm
Yeah,
just gonna
yeah,
take one point
yeah,
of
yeah,
access and filter a bunch. Um,
yeah.
but then things like Pitchell, like people can see you all the time,
Hmm.
and thankfully I've had a few athletes that have completed the brutes and they have like all the data, they have
Hmm.
lots
Hmm.
of tips that I can kind of go back to and say, okay, first one's Georgia Loop. What do you got for me? And then
Hmm.
they can just do a data dump and say, here's everything, here's suggestions, here's what I liked, didn't like. So, I'll create those conversations as we approach because Georgia Loop will be approaching rapidly.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, you kind of touched on earlier that like health is a priority. You and I have kind of had a little hiccup
hmm
Just my knee,
hmm
it's just acted kind of wonky. It's getting much better. I did a
hmm
workout yesterday and didn't have any problems. I put a lot of force on that quad
hmm
and
hmm
knee, and it held up just fine.
hmm
So I think we're coming out of the woods on that. But when you see little setbacks like that, and you have events coming up, like how do you, what mindset do you take? Do you say like, okay, this is where we're at? Perhaps we push the event, or what? In other words, what would it take for you to throw up a red flag and be like, let's see if we can push this back a little bit more. I think we need a little bit more training.
hmm If if it's like an injury that has stopped that athlete in his tracks, and it's like, oh, we're gonna need to take like 1 to 2 weeks downtime, that's a big red flag.
Yeah,
Because if it's that severe, you got to take that much time off.
right.
It's like, okay, you take that time off and you're gonna recover and you come back 100%. But now we're closer to this race in which at this point the training should be a bigger load, right? So you've taken off the necessary time to be recovered, but we don't want to throw you right back into maybe that 12 hours that was planned when you're 2 weeks ago, you were at 8 hours and that was on the precipice of injury, right? If we evaluate that we can bump that volume down that keeps you healthy and still gives you the best chance of success, boom, like let's stick to the plan. Also understanding the athlete's goals for that event. Like if it's like, hey, I've got a very specific outcome goal for this race. I want to go sub 24. I've did the race 5 times. I want a PR. Okay, that's going to take like your best level of training. And if we have a setback with injury, that best level of training is now no longer attainable, which means you're not going to be able to be prepared as best you want that aligns with your goals. So we have to have a conversation of like, are you willing to like pivot to like a B goal and not chase that outcome goal? And if the answer is no, it's like, hey, it's totally fine. It's what gets you most fired up at your training. Then yeah, we need to push this back or we need to pick out another race.
Right.
Yeah.
And thankfully mine are just completion.
Mhm. Yeah. That's the thing with
I mean,
brutes. Like, yeah,
yeah.
it's I at times abhor that like just finish, Like I feel like that can give the athlete a bit of an out. It undersells their ability at times. But yeah, especially with this one, like a big one is like completion because they're massive challenges and undertaking. It's not like a true race. To my knowledge, like the people that did the Brooch Challenge, I believe they've tracked like the fastest cumulative time, but there's not like a big push or pressure of like that's the ethos of this challenge. It in this case, it is like, hey, these are classic routes in the Southeast. Go enjoy them, have fun, stay healthy, have memorable experiences. And if you want to go fast, go for it. But really, like, yeah, just go complete it and have fun.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's like you said, they're not races. I'm not
hmm hmm
not going after FKTs or anything like that. It's
hmm
just a
hmm
pure enjoyment of these loops, but it's the
hmm
culmination of all of them that I
hmm
think just like doing the Grand Slam. I wasn't trying to do
hmm
anything crazy. I just
hmm
wanted to
hmm
finish each 100.
hmm
So it's the same thing here. It's just get through
hmm
each. I had very little experience on the Georgia Loop, the Foothills Trail, Massanutten,
hmm hmm
and I've done half of SCAR. Well, I
hmm
did the first 12 miles and I did the
hmm
last 50K. So I've seen a lot of
hmm
SCAR.
hmm
But I have three that I have very little experience on out of
hmm
the six that we're doing, which would include Art Load. And I'm
hmm
very familiar with Art Load. I've done Pitchell, and like I said, I explained my experience on SCAR.
hmm hmm
Um, and then it just leads to, December 7th. What happens on December
Yeah.
7th with the lotteries,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
if that doesn't happen, then we kind of have to, reanalyze, right? And just say, hey, like
hmm
what do we need to do in order to get a qualifier in? What would be a
hmm
suitable qualifier?
hmm
Because my window, as you kind of talked about earlier, my window is very small for 100
hmm
milers. It becomes very difficult. When I started looking at the list, I was like, oh man, like where I'd have to probably travel out west in order to get a
hmm
qualifier in because it would have to be during the summer slash early fall where like the kids aren't in their championship season yet.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
so but we'll see what December 7th brings.
Hmm. Hmm.
Maybe luck befalls us. um,
And again, I think like the big thing here, like we're gonna know by December 7th, which is nice.
right.
Like
Yeah.
there's gonna be so much time to shuffle these things around that you're not married to a specific date of the course being marked and there being aid stations because they're self-supported.
Yeah.
Like and like the Hard Rock qualifier you're gonna have to target again fits with the demands and the type of training you do. It's just gonna be shuffling around the different events to where it flows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what we tried to do, and when I kind of put these things on calendars, I tried to find like holiday weekends that I
Hmm.
could do these that I knew I was going to have meets with the kids.
Hmm.
I'd have time, and my family could come help if I needed them to, or I could recruit friends to do this, or I could do it by myself.
Hmm.
Uh, I feel pretty comfortable about like some of these just possibly doing it solo, but
Hmm.
yeah, I think that's things that I'm gonna have the conversation with the family and say, like,
Hmm. Hmm.
like, what's your level of comfort of coming out and doing this? Uh,
Hmm.
or, should I recruit others or do I feel okay just going out and doing this? Because there's a lot of courses that have, enough out there that if I carry the other supplies, I can get water along the way and do it solo. Um,
Hmm.
we've done art load solo. We didn't do the yo-yo.
Hmm.
We did that supported, but like I've done art load solo because there's plenty of
Hmm.
water sources. Same with Scar.
Hmm.
I mean it's a long
Hmm.
distance,
Hmm.
but you probably could do that one solo. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Like it's obviously carrying a lot of food, but
yeah,
that's a key part of the planning and logistics. Knowing your water for
right,
these,
right.
for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. Any other factors we should consider when getting into this? Like um, I think moving Massanutten, especially like Sue earlier, it
Hmm.
may align well with like somewhere like just after Foothills, because as you said, Foothills is
Hmm.
202 feet of gain per mile,
Hmm.
whereas
Hmm.
Massanutten is only 179. So two
Hmm.
very runnable ones, and then
Hmm.
um, if we do get an art lobe, excuse me, if we do get in the hard rock, I like art lobe leading into that because it is the biggest outlier, 300 feet per
Hmm.
mile. And then,
Hmm.
hard rock being 320, it is a good, kind of precursor to hard rock.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I think that fits well. So, maybe switching Massanutten and Pitchell um,
Hmm.
would be potential there.
And
Uh,
what's nice, like if you look at the elevation profile of foothills into Massanutten, like your longest climb for foothills is going from 1,700 feet to 3,500 feet. So 1,700 feet of climbing in one go.
right.
For Massanutten, you're looking at same thing, 1,500 feet in one go. So, and relative to these others, these are the more rolling
Mhm.
types of terrain, which necessitates like a different type of training. So stacking those close together, yeah, most ideal for sure.
Now, as um, I'm just thinking outside the box here, the
Hmm.
Massanutten has the 100 miler. Um,
Hmm.
do they technically complete the Massanutten loop in the 100 miler? That would
That
be,
I'm not 100% sure on. I'm
yeah.
not, yeah.
Like if they had, if the cards aligned and they had a Hard Rock
Mhm.
qualifier attached to that, and it was
Yeah,
the loop that we could complete, I mean, it would kind of kill two birds with one stone.
yeah, yeah.
But again, we'll have to see about that. And
Mhm.
Charles Raffsperger, who came up with this, he might be able to better to answer those questions. But
If that's allowed,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So but yeah, just some outside thinking. But
Mhm.
um, excellent, man. Yeah, we've already begun kind of poll usage. Ryan started putting that in the schedule
Mhm.
this past weekend. I had two back-to-back long runs. Unfortunately, some of the trail areas here are still inaccessible due to the trees that are down. So we tried to start to get some good climbing in, but the trails aren't quite there yet. So we're
Mhm.
getting there though. We're trying to figure out what is accessible, and I'm getting more and more feedback from other runners as to oh, this is clear, this is good. You can go out here. So but yeah, it's a measure of patience. Definitely
Hmm.
right now, figuring out what we can do and what we can't. Um,
Hmm.
okay, so anything else that you can think of? Anything that we need to talk further about on the long-term plan? In the long-term plan, you have basically color coded the various phases of
Hmm.
training,
Hmm.
different types of blocks. How do you use those?
Hmm.
What does that look like for your typical ultra runner? Let's say that they had like a typical season, not like my
Hmm.
craziness,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
what would it look like for somebody that's building towards 100? How would that work
Hmm.
out?
Yeah. So let's say that 100 is Hard Rock, the 28th week of the year in July.
Yeah.
All right. So as you said, identify the demands of the event and work backwards of what's the most specific physiology of Hard Rock endurance.
Mhm.
And that's like only a couple people going sub 24. Median finishing time there is what, like 38, 40 hours, right? Like
Yeah.
endurance. Okay. Then the skill. You better be good with poles because you've got long climbs in the sense, and with that elevation, you've got to be getting in the requisite elevation as best you can. So that's defining what that last 8 to 12 weeks is really going to focus on, getting matching the vert as best as one can and getting in as much volume as that athlete can handle from a load perspective and balance of life. Again, like there's no hard and fast rule of like, oh, if you're doing a 40-hour race, your training has to be 40% of that per week. Like now, like that's totally impractical. That's not individualized coaching, right? So we're working backwards from that. We've identified what's the most specific physiology, what are the skills, what's the elevation to work with. So that's when like May, June is going to hunker down with that. All right. And then like a key determinant of ultra running performance is still like how fit is the athlete. And to get an athlete most fit, they need to cycle through a good LT, lactate threshold, tempo block. Those are all interchangeable terms. Like a good VO2 max block, right? Just because hard rock is going to be hike up, run down, like you're not going to do that starting in December. You're going to leave some fitness gains on the table. So in determining um, how the athlete's going to do an LT or VO2 max block, um, their training history and how they've responded to different types of intensities is really going to define that. Some people, when they've tried to do a VO2 max block, which typically looks like 2 to 4 minute intervals in duration, 5 by 3 minute workout, 7 by 3 minute workout, very, very challenging. Maybe they've been more injury prone to that. So may start with the tempo block, right? And like cycle through there. But again, like main nuts and bolts, what are the demands of the event? That like last 8 to I'd argue for hard rock, you probably need to extend that to like maybe 12, 14 weeks out because the demands are so specific and extreme, right? Like that's what we're going to target. And then before that, we're going to integrate these different types of intensity because that's going to increase the athlete's fitness. And then again, for hard rock, like, okay, maybe December we do like a specific um, skill focus of working poles and getting comfortable with that, right? Like hey, you've never like truly focused on hiking uphill and training. So when we do this VO2 max block in February on your long runs, you're just gonna hike uphill, learn how to use poles and get comfortable with them, and then run down. So that's like it's not only thinking about like what physiology are we targeting, but there's also a skill component we can target within that block as well.
Right on. Yeah. And as you said, not everybody has to do a VO2 max phase.
Yeah, no, yeah, because like somebody's injury prone to that no matter what.
Right.
And then like, okay, maybe we throw them on the bike for that. That's not an option. Again, like it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah. Right.
There's like you replace like the VO2 max block with like one of those skill blocks I talked about, right? Like, hey, let's get better technical running.
Yeah.
That's gonna serve you well as a trail runner.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you. Um, All right. Well, that was a great overview here, Ryan. I really appreciate your time and kind of sharing all this with us. Anything you want to close with or share? Perhaps tell us how people can find you.
Um, yeah, we can put like my email address in the show notes.
Okay.
That's just randerson@trainright.com. Um, Instagram is another way people can like reach out. Don't expect a lot of content per se unless you just like things about dogs. You'll get some fun posts there. And like whenever I get out to the support my athletes in person, that's always fun to throw up updates there. Um, but yeah, I'd say email or that, which we can throw in the show notes. My first name, Ryne, Ryan, always throws people for a loop. So
Yes. Okay. I'll put that all in the show notes. Once again, thank you, Ryan. I really appreciate you. And I appreciate all of your support and definitely your knowledge here in helping me get through this.
yeah, it's gonna be a fun year.
Oh, I agree. I want to thank Ryan once again for jumping on board and having that discussion. A lot there. Hopefully, you got to unpack some stuff. A reminder that the long range plan, the link will be in the show notes, and you can kind of copy and paste that or use it how you will to create your own long term plan. It kind of helps the figure out the season and where you're going and what you're doing. It's something that I hope to implement with my athletes moving forward in 2025. It's kind of give that. I usually just put notes in Training Peaks as to what we're looking at, so the athlete can kind of scroll through Training Peaks and see, okay, here's a new phase, and here's what we're going to be working on. So I do it in a slightly different way, but it may be a tool that you want to use. So that again is in the show notes. And again, if you want to reach out to Ryan for coaching or for questions, his contact information will be in the show notes as well. So thank you again, Ryan. Here in my world, I just finished cutting out the rest of the rugby trails. So that felt really good. So the middle school trails have all been cleared. There's some reroutes. It's going to take a little bit more work to kind of finalize some of the trails themselves to make them, safe and sustainable. I want to thank again the Carolina Mountain Club for their continued support and assistance. They've done some amazing things on the trails. So if you're local to the area, go check out the rugby middle school trails. You can dive back into Strava for me and see that I did a little over 5 miles and I had about 1,300 feet of gain. So that if you're looking for some fun trails to get some vert on, different scenery, head out there. Now you're going to be doing loops and repeats and such, but every once in a while it's kind of fun to do something different. But keep in mind you have to do that after school hours. Okay, so make sure you're not there during school or during practice time. The weekends are a great time to head out there. So, but please check those out. And man, I want to thank, there's so many people that have kind of reached out recently about coaching. I still have some spots available. So if you're looking to have coaching in 2025, don't hesitate to reach out. Happy to talk about that. It's always great to have that conversation and, especially hear about your goals and where you're looking to go. And kind of find out if I'm the right fit for you. So please, whichever way you want to reach out, check out the show notes. There's, a bunch of different ways you can reach out, but I appreciate everybody that has done so. Also appreciate all of my athletes. It's been a little bit tough, here at the end of the year due to the storm and such, but we're making our way and regrowing. So I appreciate everybody that's part of the Running is Life coaching. Thank you guys. We'll continue to grow. As a note, I have to change the website, but coaching fee will go up to $150 as of January 1, just so everybody is clear. I want to make sure that I'm always clear with everybody. I still don't have a contract to sign up. You don't have to sign up for X amount of months. I'm here for what you need. So if it's only for a few months, get you through an event, happy to do so. Of course, I love having people on long term. That way, we kind of become consistent. I learn better how to effectively train and be a part of that experience. So, but please reach out if you have any questions. Okay. This weekend we are heading off to Cary, North Carolina. My son and daughter will both be racing on the 16th at Cary Academy. There's a 2-mile event there. It's called the Charger 2-mile tune-up. It's going to serve as a potential qualifier for the indoor North Carolina State meet. It does count towards their high school careers. So if they PR, get a school record, etc., it does count towards that. So Keegan and Amberin will both be racing the 2-mile. So I look forward to that this weekend. The following weekend, we'll be back in Cary for the Nike Regional Cross-Country Meet. It's NXR. So we'll be back there. Not sure if Keegan's going to race. Amberin wants to do the community 5K, and I've got a few of the younger athletes from the team that are doing Nike. The weekend after that, we'll be in Charlotte for the Foot Locker Regional Meet. We'll be at McAlpine Regional Park, and that will, we'll see how that goes for Keegan. The top 8 go to the national meet. I would love to see him qualify and go. So we'll see how it goes. But, Amberin will be running her age group race, which is a 5K. So she's looking forward to that. She's been continuing to train, as has Keegan. And so the season continues. Winter track actually just started, so we've begun winter track as well. So I've got a few kids that are still running cross country, and then all of the winter track athletes. So a little bit crazy at the moment logistically. It's a little bit challenging to divert my attention in so many different directions, but we're learning, we're coping, we're getting there, and trying to enjoy the process all at the same time. So lots going on, lots of travel, lots of fun. We kind of talked about it in my conversation with Ryan. It's just busy. Such is life. I'm really enjoying the coaching at the high school level. These kids are wonderful and amazing. States was just such a great experience. Really appreciate all of their efforts. Both teams just phenomenal performances. So happy for the girls who finished 3rd and the boys who finished 4th. So I've said that in the past, but just wanted to reiterate and congratulate those athletes. So proud of them. We had our end of season party, and it was just very emotional because I've known a lot of these kids since they were in kindergarten, and watched a lot of them grow in running, which is just wonderful to be a part of that process. So I'm grateful for what I do, for the opportunities that I have. I'm grateful to all of you who continue to listen and support this podcast. I'm super grateful to my Patreon supporters that help me and keep motivating me to keep doing this podcast and trying to turn out information that will be helpful to runners. As always, if you have topics, conversations, people that you want me to interview and hear from, please let me know. Happy to hear from you, and I certainly appreciate all the people that have reached out and asked me for advice. If it's not necessarily coaching, it's just training advice. I'm happy to provide that. So always here for you guys, and I appreciate it. So until next time, keep moving forward, my friends. Running is life.